Contemplate the reality of witnessing an individual state their absolute commitment within a structure where your designation occupies every single document: the title, the financing, the insurance tracking, the physical evaluation, recognizing they selected that specific asset as the tapestry for their romance while actively choosing to eliminate your presence from their existence. Erasing the creator of your foundation guarantees your structure will eventually collapse. If you have ever been written out of a narrative you constructed with your own labor, support this channel with a like. And if you wonder regarding the specific consequences when that sold indicator was placed, remain engaged. The social celebration commenced near 4 o'clock in the outdoor space, enhanced by illumination, featuring a hospitality station near the perimeter where her father distributed refreshments like an individual convinced his child had aligned with security. The catering staff organized service positions along the terrace, presenting gourmet selections and a sophisticated 3-tier cake decorated with elegant accents. Clara transitioned into lighter attire for dancing, Julian relaxed his formal presentation, and the documentarian traversed the space securing candid views, her mother sharing joy, her sister celebrating with family, and Arthur seated at the perimeter with a beverage, observing his son with an expression resembling validation, though it represented merely relief that another entity was managing Julian's survival now. The celebratory expressions commenced near 4:30. Her mother stood, declaring, "To this spectacular environment where they will establish their future. To Julian, who sacrificed so forcefully to provide my child an estate to call their own. And to Clara, who merits every variation of this success." The gathering raised their glasses in unison, and Julian offered his most effective expression, the specific presentation that had extracted him from complications since childhood. 5 o'clock arrived. While the celebrations persisted in the outdoor space, while Julian accompanied Clara beneath the illumination, and while the oak tree cast elongated shadows across the landscape, the brokerage vehicle arrived at the front of the property. The operational team advanced to the edge of the lawn, positioning the physical sign securely into the landscape. White background, dark text, the corporate logo prominent, displaying the word sold. It entered the ground precisely at 5:07. No individual in the outdoor space registered the occurrence. They were entirely occupied with celebration, completely oblivious that the foundation of their future had just been transferred to alternative ownership. The gathering concluded near 7 o'clock. Attendees commenced moving toward the front exit, collecting personal items, offering final expressions, and embracing the couple on the exterior platform. The absolute majority traversed past the indicator without processing its presence, insulated by refreshment and the general satisfaction of a successful celebration. However, Clara's younger sister was 23 and extensively connected to digital platforms. She paused at the perimeter to document a self-portrait with the residence visible behind her, intending to publish it with a commentary regarding the significant milestone. She raised her device, aligned the image, smiled, evaluated the digital preview, then directed her focus past her own image to the object mounted in the landscape. She lowered her device, advanced toward the indicator, and analyzed the text repeatedly. "Julian," she called out, remaining focused on the sign, her tone carrying that specific frequency that manifests when an individual poses an inquiry they already comprehend the reality of. "Julian, does a commercial sign occupy your front lawn?" The interactions on the platform ceased instantly. Her father deposited his glass, her mother turned, and Julian, standing at the entrance with his arm around Clara, lost all coloration completely. Not gradually, but instantaneously, as if his internal systems had immediately ceased operation. "What variation of sign?" he inquired. The entire wedding assembly advanced toward the front landscape, the bridal party, the family, Arthur with his beverage, and the documentarian persistently recording because professionals never cease operation. They gathered on the front lawn of a residence that no longer belonged to any individual standing there, staring blankly at a prominent indicator displaying sold in characters visible from the roadway. The celebratory illumination remained active in the backyard, the cake reposed on the table, and the oak tree remained completely indifferent to the human crisis. Clara advanced toward the indicator in her celebratory attire, barefoot because she had discarded her footwear during the initial dances. She read the text aloud deliberately, as if analyzing a critical medical report requiring absolute numerical accuracy. Sold. Regional Real Estate Agency. Helen Park, broker. She turned around slowly. The entire gathering was observing her actions. Julian remained on the platform, his arms limp at his sides, his features resembling old parchment. Julian. Her tone was completely unwavering, the precise delivery of a professional who communicates critical diagnoses to families with absolute clarity, compassion, and zero superficial phrasing. Does there exist something you require to clarify to me? It constitutes an absolute error. Incorrect destination. Must represent a logistical mix-up. Whose designation occupies the legal title of this residence, Julian? An absolute quiet ensued, the specific variation of silence that is not vacant, but dense. Full of every single misdirection positioned atop every prior misdirection, unstable like a stack of ceramics in a commercial kitchen, a single breath from complete destruction. Whose name, Julian? Her mother advanced, placing a supportive hand on Clara's shoulder, while her father stood behind them, his weathered hands compressed into fists, not seeking physical conflict but merely requiring stability. Is there an element you require to disclose to us? Her mother inquired, her tone the absolute opposite of unwavering, trembling with the realization that her child had potentially committed her future to an absolute fabrication. Julian attempted speech repeatedly, offering no substance. I possess an explanation. That represents the universal phrase utilized when an explanation is entirely non-existent, the standard introduction to a falsehood that has not been constructed yet. Clara stood barefoot on the liquidated landscape in her wedding attire and waited. It represents an absolute deception, Julian asserted, speaking rapidly now, his internal charm mechanism failing completely, producing assertions at a frequency suggesting zero logical validation. Someone is executing a fraudulent operation. Inaccurate indicator. Wrong destination. I will contact law enforcement immediately. Clara remained completely motionless. Then present the authentic deed. What? The legal title documentation. Julian, if this constitutes your property, present the deed. You preserve it inside the structure, correct? Within a secure repository, a safe, or a document drawer. Julian's features shifted textlessly. Present the title documentation. It reposes at the financial institution. They retain the authentic origin. No, they do not. I purchased my own transportation. I possess awareness of how legal documentation functions. Present the title. He was entirely incapable of performing the action. He could not display the documentation because the authentic deed reposed within a secure filing unit in a single-chamber urban apartment 68 miles away, organized under a specific suburban classification with a precise marker because the lawful owner was a financial professional who structured everything accurately. Clara observed his presentation, and that marked the exact instance the entire structure collapsed, not with a dramatic impact, but with a slow, devastating realization. I have witnessed individuals execute deceptions on their most challenging days, Julian's patients asserting abstinence while their internal systems are failing, family members claiming stability when they are broken. I maintain complete awareness of what deception resembles, and I am observing it directly right now. Julian's composure shattered entirely. Her mother was weeping, her father offered physical support, and her sister stood with her device lowered, refusing to record because certain occurrences are too devastating for a digital screen. And far in the background of the gathering, Arthur sat in his folding chair with his beverage, offering zero commentary because remaining silent was the only attribute Arthur had ever successfully maintained. It was reserved exclusively for the immediate family. Sunday morning arrived, the ceremonial decorations fading in the outdoor space, the remaining cake softening in the regional humidity. Clara had experienced zero rest. She communicated this reality to me subsequently. She had occupied the secondary chamber with the security lock engaged, ignoring Julian's repeated attempts at communication. At 6 a.m, while the structure maintained complete silence, she activated her terminal, accessing the Regional Public Records Registry. She input the specific property coordinates, a search requiring less than 4 seconds. The data emerged completely clear and unblemished, the standard behavior of public data repositories lacking drama or emotion, presenting merely verified facts indexed by a public official entirely unaware of the domestic devastation those metrics would eventually authorize. Proprietor, Elena Marie. Acquisition date, 24 months prior. Transaction value, $770,000. Sole proprietor, 0 secondary investors, no transfer records active. Clara sat at the dining table, the identical surface where I had once displayed the initial acquisition parameters to Julian, the identical location where her family had consumed a celebratory meal while complimenting Julian on his magnificent estate. She stared intensely at the digital monitor before closing the terminal, transporting it to the central living space where Julian reposed on the furniture, still wearing his ceremonial attire unbuttoned, appearing like an individual who had spent the night organizing justifications only to reject them all. She positioned the terminal on the central table, directing the monitor toward his view. You asserted to me that you purchased this estate. Julian evaluated the data, observed Clara, then returned his focus to the monitor. The Public Registry Office is incapable of deception or superficial charm. It refuses to wait for an aligned circumstance. It simply exists in black and white text, detailing the absolute reality that every alternative individual was too terrified or too comfortable to articulate. Julian stared at the data for an extended duration. Clara stood above his position, arms crossed, wearing casual attire, her ceremonial dress suspended on the secondary chamber entrance like a spectral reminder of the prior day. Elena intended to convey the asset to my ownership, he stated eventually. Once my stability was verified, that constituted the understanding. You asserted to me that you purchased it. You informed my father you provided a 20% down payment. You told my mother this represented your personal achievement. You claimed you earned it. I intended to earn the asset. You failed to earn it, Julian. You failed to even attempt the process. He covered his face with his hands, his physical form collapsing into the furniture under the sheer gravity of his exposure. Did you exclude your sister because you harbored terror that she would disclose the reality? The inquiry descended like an object dropped into undisturbed waters, the metaphorical ripples traversing the living space, through the cooking area, and out into the landscape where the ceremonial seating remained arranged in perfect files, and the oak tree stood as a silent witness to an alliance constructed entirely on deception. Julian refused to elevate his gaze. Yes, he whispered barely audibly, the single authentic declaration my brother had articulated in 2 annual cycles, expressed into his own hands within a space filled with items he never financed, on the morning following a ceremony that should never have occurred, inside a structure that was never his possession. Yes, I excluded her because I feared she would inform you. I feared your departure. Clara uncrossed her arms. Your fear was entirely justified. She retreated to the secondary chamber, leaving Julian alone on the furniture. The public records data illuminated the terminal screen, patient, fixed, and permanent, Elena Marie, sole owner. The truth had remained accessible throughout the entire duration, filed and catalogued, awaiting an individual to look. Clara contacted her family. Her parents and sister arrived within the hour, having occupied a local lodging asset minutes away, none having achieved significant rest either. They entered the living space where Julian remained on the furniture, having transitioned into fresh attire, an action that struck me as the most characteristically Julian element imaginable, focusing on appearance even amidst total structural collapse. Clara stood in the center of the environment, addressing her family with the absolute stability of a medical professional delivering a clinical assessment. Julian did not purchase this estate. His sister Elena secured it 2 years ago, financed the down payment, assumed the primary obligation, and retained the title exclusively in her name. Julian was mandated to earn the transfer by maintaining employment and satisfying the monthly costs. He executed neither requirement. Complete silence ensued. Her father advanced, a substantial individual broadened by 3 decades of manual landscape operation. He stopped mere feet from Julian's position, standing silently. You informed me you provided a 20% down payment. You observed my expression at this table and asserted it required extensive endurance to save those resources. I shook your hand based on that deception. Julian opened his mouth, generating 0 sound. Was any single component authentic? Any element at all? Her sister spoke from the entrance, the sibling who was excluded from the event that represents the individual who actually purchased this residence. Correct, Clara confirmed. His sister Elena acquired the asset, and Julian excluded her from the ceremony because he feared she would disclose the reality to our family. Her mother sat heavily on a dining chair, offering 0 words, merely surveying the environment, the premium molding, the hardwood flooring, the kitchen amenities, perceiving every surface completely differently now. Every wall, every fixture rewritten instantly, not Julian's achievement, never Julian's asset. Here is the fundamental lesson I have acquired regarding reality. You can obscure it from individuals, but you are entirely incapable of concealing it from official documentations, deeds, public records, and financial receipts. They are immune to forgetting, immune to superficial charm, and completely indifferent to human emotion. If you have witnessed reality surface after an individual attempted to bury it completely, share your experience below and remain engaged, because Clara contacted my position next. My device signaled at 11:14 on Sunday morning. I was seated at my dining table consuming toast, analyzing current events on my digital pad, experiencing the tranquil existence of an individual who had authorized a disruption 68 miles distant and was now awaiting the clearance of the atmosphere. The identification detailed Clara Torres, not Clara Marie. She had retained her designation, and perhaps she would permanently. Elena, this is Clara. I evaluated the title documentation. I maintain awareness of that. I searched the public registry this morning. Your designation occupies every record. It does. A protracted pause ensued, and I could detect ambient audio, her mother or sister organizing their departure. The sounds of a family restructuring around a child who had just discovered her commitment was made to an illusion of character. Why did you withhold this information from me? Would you have credited my account? Your partner's sister manifests asserting that he fails to own the property, that she holds the title. Would you have accepted that assertion, or would you have assumed I was consumed by resentment and bitterness, precisely as Julian detailed to you? Another pause occurred. He asserted you were uncooperative. I am not uncooperative. I am a financial professional. I require reality to be precise. The faintest sound emerged, not an authentic laugh, but an approximation, something fracturing at the perimeter. I experience regret that you are entangled in this scenario, Clara. My motivation to liquidate the asset was not driven by a desire to injure your reality. I comprehend precisely the target of this action. It centers on Julian. It centers on Julian, it centers on your reality, and it centers on the fact that you surrendered every resource to his existence while he provided 0 return, subsequently locking you out of your own threshold. I remained silent for a moment. No individual had ever reflected the dynamic back to my awareness so clearly, without hesitation or qualification. I appreciate your articulation of that reality, I stated. I appreciate your willingness to answer the phone, she responded. Clara returned to the central living space. I have just communicated with your sister. Julian recoiled slightly, as if confronting a physical object. The family remained positioned, her mother in the chair, her father against the structure, her sister at the entrance. Arthur remained outside, sitting within his transport in the driveway because Arthur had never possessed the capability to remain in an environment where circumstances were difficult. A real family shares your burdens instead of commercializing your sacrifices. She purchased this residence for your benefit, Clara stated. Financed the complete initial down payment, secured the primary obligation in her name, and covered every transaction you neglected, which represented the absolute majority. Julian stood up. I intended to reimburse her resources. With what mechanism? You have failed to sustain employment for more than 5 months consecutively. I was executing attempts. Attempts. She has been residing in a single-chamber environment facing a parking structure while you hosted social functions in an estate she financed for your benefit. She retained the title because your stability was insufficient to trust with ownership, and her assessment was entirely accurate. Her father stepped away from the structure, expressionless, his physical posture rigid as he managed expressions he refused to articulate before his children. Julian directed his attention toward him. Sir, I desired to become an individual you would respect. I desired Clara to perceive me as successful. I maintained respect for your reality, her father responded, his tone low and restrained, the method a powerful individual utilizes when containing significant energy. I maintained respect for your position, Julian. I informed my spouse, my acquaintances, and my operational staff that my child had aligned with an honorable individual, a man who labors forcefully, a man who constructed an existence. I maintained that perspective before I discovered it constituted an absolute fabrication. Her mother reached for his hand, her sister observed the flooring, and Julian possessed zero remaining resources, no superficial charm, no defenses, no fragile structure of cards, merely an environment of individuals observing his authentic character for the first time. The environment attained complete stillness, the specific variation of quiet that possesses mass, pressing against your composure and rendering the mechanical tracking on the wall resembling a blunt instrument. Clara broke the silence. We possessed a residence, Julian, your sister's residence. She provided the asset, she trusted your capacity to earn the transfer, and you excluded her from the property. Julian returned to the furniture. I did not exclude her character. You barred her from her own legal asset on her own front lawn while she sustained the carrying costs from an apartment she could scarcely afford. Her sister spoke. She has been satisfying the financing obligations while residing elsewhere. Correct, Clara validated. Every single month for 24 months. Her sister shook her head slowly, the method utilized when mathematical reality exposes what human emotion attempted to obscure. Her mother stood up. She was a compact individual, yet she occupied the exit space completely when she transitioned to it, observing Julian with the specific expression of a parent evaluating the entity that compromised her child's security. There exists no presentation on earth more definitive. Clara advanced to the kitchen space, removing her wedding band, a simple circle of white gold, modest, because Clara lacked a desire for ostentation. She positioned the object on the premium surface, the countertop I had selected during an evaluation I attended entirely alone. I am relocating to my maternal home, she announced. Her father observed Julian. My child merited absolute reality. She merited it prior to the token, prior to the vows, and prior to transferring her existence into this structure. The family departed the environment, doors secured, engine activated, gravel disturbed, absolute vacancy. Julian sat entirely alone within a structure that was never his property. The communication arrived that evening at 8:30. The sky beyond my window displayed that deep regional coloration that manifests in early summer when the sun has receded behind the peaks but the illumination persists slightly. Elena, this is Clara. I have separated from him. She articulated it plainly, the method utilized to report an unblemished metric. The patient is stable. I have departed the scenario. I occupy my maternal home. I retrieved my personal effects, my professional tools, and I departed. I experience regret regarding the disruption, Clara. Offer no apologies. You provided an absolute benefit. The expressions lingered, and I detected a structural shift within my awareness, some pressure that had compromised a structural partition since the day Julian transmitted that digital notification. That smiling emblem. Not relief exclusively, but absolute recognition. For what duration did you sustain his existence? She inquired. 10 years. 10 continuous years. And he barred your presence from the residence you financed for his benefit. He did. I would have authorized the liquidation as well. Absolute quiet ensued, both of us maintaining our positions, a healthcare provider and a financial manager, separated by 68 miles, connected by an individual who had deceived both realities and an estate that neither would ever occupy again. You comprehend what occupies my thoughts, Clara remarked. I developed devotion to his character in that outdoor space beneath that landmark tree. I believed it represented reality. The landmark tree was real, I responded. Yes, the tree was real. I remained within my apartment after the communication concluded, experiencing the sensation of being understood for the initial instance in memory, not pitted, not managed, and not required for survival, but completely understood by an individual I scarcely knew who had analyzed the identical matrix of data and reached the identical resolution without requiring external explanation. My motivation to liquidate that structure was not driven by a desire to penalize Julian. I liquidated it because it constituted my legal asset. Because a decade of sustaining an individual fails to grant them the authority to bar your presence from your own entrance. Because the entities who characterize themselves as your immediate family should realistically execute actions aligning with that definition before utilizing the phrase within a digital transmission accompanied by a smiling emblem. Because I occupied that registration office completely alone, authorized those documents entirely alone, and financed every component independently. An isolated reality is perfectly acceptable when it represents a personal choice, but isolation transforms into something entirely different when it is forced upon you by the individuals who owe you the absolute most. I purchased a residence for my sibling, he excluded me from the entrance, consequently I liquidated the asset, and the bride validated the choice completely. 3 days subsequent, on a Tuesday evening, another knock resonated against my entrance, soft on this occasion, lacking Julian's desperate force. Upon opening the door, Arthur was present, my father, 61 years of age, wearing faded utilitarian attire and an aged factory cap he had not utilized in 3 years, standing upon my threshold with his hands contained in his pockets and his posture contracted as if attempting to minimize his physical presence. I received the information, he stated quietly. I shifted position, permitting his entrance. He stepped inside, surveying my restricted environment, the window facing the parking structure, the narrow cooking space, the workstation with the document repository, the shelves containing my professional literature, and the modest furniture where I observed media alone on weekend evenings. He was experiencing the reality for the initial instance. My father had failed to visit my residence a single time during the 4 years of my occupancy. He stood within my living environment, turning in a slow circle, and I watched his features shift as the underlying mathematics became undeniable. This represented the environment where his daughter resided, the quality of life she could afford after expending her entire security to sustain his son. He sat upon the furniture, removed his cap, and held the object in his hands. "Your mother," he commenced, then ceased speech, evaluating the cap before looking toward my position. I witnessed an expression on his features that had been absent since the night preceding her memorial, a brief glimpse of the individual he had once been, the parent who instructed my balance on a bicycle, the partner who danced with Beatrice in the kitchen on weekend mornings. It persisted for approximately 2 seconds. "Sustain your own security," he stated. He stood up, replaced the cap, advanced toward the exit, and almost turned back. Almost. "Farewell, father." He offered a single movement of acknowledgement, traversed the corridor, and departed. That near expression represents the fundamental narrative of my household. 2 months subsequent, Julian lost access to the structure completely, the acquiring entities occupying the property 3 weeks following the finalization. Julian possessed 0 alternative destinations, returning subsequently to Arthur's 3-bedroom suburban home, the structure featuring compromised paint, empty garden boxes, and the recliner that preserved the permanent contours of Arthur's presence. He secured a hospitality position at an establishment adjacent to the main transit line, a different venue, the identical operational pattern, yet at least he maintained functional labor. Clara initiated legal proceedings for complete dissolution based on misrepresentation, a process simplified by the minimal duration of the formal union. Her family severed interactions with Julian entirely, her father refused to acknowledge communications, her mother restricted telephonic access, and her sister published a digital update asserting the necessity of personal peace against a scenic backdrop, which represents her generation's method of securing a lock against an individual. Clara returned to her isolated apartment in the city, an asset she had retained when relocating to Julian's residence, proving that some structural component of her awareness had maintained an emergency exit strategy, an attribute that clarifies the instinctual capacity of a professional operating within an intensive care unit. She resumed her operational shifts within a week. Regarding my own metrics, $155,000 cleared from the liquidation. I cleared my remaining $22,000 in educational obligations completely, allocating the absolute remainder into a premium interest-bearing depository without disturbing the principal. I retained my apartment, I retained my professional position, I retained my aging sedan, and I preserved my existence precisely as it had been established, only significantly lighter because I was no longer sustaining the substantial carrying costs for an individual who asserted my presence was insufficient to stand within his backyard. Clara and I met for coffee a single time approximately 6 weeks following the resolution, selecting a venue on a quiet avenue. We sat at a compact table adjacent to the window, consuming refreshments and avoiding discussion regarding Julian. We did not establish a deep friendship, but we maintained absolute understanding of each other's reality. Under normal parameters, that is entirely sufficient. A Thursday evening late, I occupied my workstation, managing my personal financial ledger, the identical spreadsheet I have maintained since my evening educational courses, updated monthly, every single dollar tracked and categorized with the absolute discipline of a woman who comprehended early that capital represents merely organized trust. The environment maintained absolute tranquility, the parking structure was dark, and I accessed the lower drawer of my workstation to deposit the current statement. Beneath the operational directories, I discovered a physical photograph I had forgotten remained there. My mother, Beatrice, seated at her modest workspace in the kitchen of our childhood home, the precise location where she settled the household obligations manually, writing tracking instruments with a standard pen, preserving a ledger within a spiral notebook because she never trusted automated terminals with financial security. She displayed a radiant expression in the image, her lenses active, pen positioned, the desk illumination casting a warm radiance around her workspace. I held the image for an extended duration. "Look, Mother. We are both operating past hours." I returned the photograph to the secure repository. I contemplated the oak tree. I thought of Julian at 13 providing warm beverages. I remembered Arthur standing within my apartment with his cap in his hands, almost articulating the expression he required to state. I thought of Clara barefoot on the lawn in her wedding dress, reading a sold indicator with the unwavering precision of a professional who processes catastrophic news for a survival. And then I reflected upon a digital message accompanied by a smiling emblem. Being protective should never mean allowing yourself to become entirely disposable, and the individuals who treat your personal sacrifices like background decorations are perpetually the most astonished when you reclaim your assets completely. An estate valued at $770,000, a ceremony where the authentic owner was explicitly barred, a bride who uncovered the absolute truth in public registries, and a sibling who discovered that immediate family cannot represent exclusively the individuals who extract resources. It must incorporate the entities who provide security. If this narrative connected with your personal reality, distribute it to others. Comment regarding your own strategy under identical parameters, and subscribe to Quiet Justice Tales. I will encounter your presence in our subsequent narrative.